In recent days, the news surrounding Disney has gotten even more negative than we thought, worse than we've already seen at this point, and that is even before what I plan to talk about in their own downfall. And this is a fact pertaining once again to the problem of live action remakes, the worst decisions they have ever done in modern times, ones done to butcher every single film they've ever produced. But none has ever been more egregious than what is going to happen for a future film known as Snow White, Disney's next big upcoming remake that is adapting the very first Disney movie, the first full-length feature animated film that actually changed animation to what we see today. How this is trying to circle back to the beginning in a live action form that has already been done more harm than good. And even though I've had my issues with the loudmouths of the anti-woke crowd creating pathetic excuses for milking content, this is a movie that clearly panders towards being woke and the butchering of the original film even before its release. And that's mainly due to the fact of Snow White's main actress herself, Rachel Zegler, putting this movie into a hole that shouldn't even be quite there yet compared to its predecessor in The Little Mermaid, a story that will be a century old by the end of the next decade compared to the one that still lives more fresh in the memory of every parent and child to this day. Well, that and of course the issue with the Seven Dwarfs, most notably omitting them from the title of the film and other issues that revolve around dwarfism as I'll get into. But before I roughly get into this, we must address the entire remake problem, because clearly people are still on the fence not minding these films exist at all when they ignore the facts they are recreating stories that aren't even a decade old like Moana itself, that they are insistent on doing something they did themselves and not adding anything new. Because remakes aren't completely a bad thing either, like I explained in the past, and one that Disney cannot unfortunately stop at this point, because the truth is a lot of people want to go see these remakes, either for reasons that I do, reviewing them on the basis of being movies, and comparing that to the original ones who just love Disney and the stories they experience and jump at the opportunity to see them again in a different form. Because thinking domestically at the box office here in the States, The Little Mermaid has still made more money than Lightyear and Strange World combined. Disney's major animated films released in the post-COVID era of 2022 were putting their totals together with even Elemental at this point gives us a total of around $306 million domestically, only about $9 million more than what Little Mermaid overall made here in the United States alone. I mean, it's not fair to judge them together considering that they were still newer stories, but still are ones produced by Disney and Pixar in the same time frame as a remake that had made a lot more money and really had a lot more coverage. It just shows that these films already have a lot of attention more than others because what people already know, and it's why most of us hate it. That for the most part, it's the same exact film in a different form that is hardly taking the initiative to present something new like they actually did in their early days when they started to remake. That at the very least, it added something new away from the original story without ruining it in the process because it wasn't trying to adapt them. And that's something a lot of people I've seen online not understand because most of these Disney remakes were adapted from other books and fairy tales. But the problem with this logic is that it forgets that these remakes are still doing mostly the exact same thing as their animated counterparts. It's not based on a book where they can visually interpret the story, and instead is based on something that's already handed out to them. Everything in the original story is handed out on a plate, and they mainly use that in the newer film rather than to spin it off into a work of its own. Because when they actually do spin, they're able to free up the story where it was in the first place in the cases that did work like Cinderella. But sadly, that isn't the case to apply for every film where looking at Mulan objectively is one of the worst films ever created. That even when they attempt to do so, they also upset many people on cultural inaccuracies and butchering of the original story, and also not providing a decent movie at the same time. That they actually stopped caring about the story that they originally had and just do it for the profit amongst other things. That we saw them when they decided to remake their own original films like Moana that is planned to release not even 9 years after the original film. So the real thing to criticize here is how one company completely misunderstands their stories in different mediums, butchering one while profiting off of another away from the portrayal of wokeness, which that is a main factor of why they exist now. And that's the case that Snow White has represented even more than any other Disney film that has been released at this point. That what has went behind this very production has become the most disrespectful thing that Disney has ever created to their very first film that made this company to what it is today. I mean, sure, there are many other factors, but above all, with what Walt Disney himself believed in and the risk he took at the time in the state of the world is what actually shaped the modern world of entertainment we see today. And those involved with this crap hardly understand those points anymore. And that is something that's seen within actress Rachel Zegler herself, whose casting and statements have truly shown what this film exactly represents. A pathetic excuse of a remake only done to profit off of modern culture and nothing more. And thinking that the original animated film is nothing more than an outdated cartoon, which is the biggest disrespect you could ever serve. Because the first major problem with this casting was the fact of her very complexion. Similar again to the Little Mermaid race controversy, but this time having more merit in the story and the character. Because the original story is a German fairy tale written by the Brothers Grimm, where it does indeed take place place in the 1500s in Germany, where the main character is described as being white as snow, literally in the name of the fairy tale itself. And the ironic thing about this is that that was actually promoted on Disney Studios' own Facebook in 2015 to promote its Blu-ray and digital release, which makes this casting outrageously stupid and one that not even Rachel herself expected at first, being casted actually before her breakout in Steven Spielberg's West Side Story even hit theaters. Because as we all know, Rachel is Latina and doesn't actually have the skin as white as snow in this case. It's one that just follows this newer trend of checking boxes for Disney's diversity push in their remakes in order to sell them to the modern audience and be respectful to everyone involved. One where people at least tried to excuse the Little Mermaid because it's mermaids and therefore not real, but not really justified for a character already designed one way with her name and the place it actually takes place in. One where people's criticisms are more justifiable to why it's stupid because it actually doesn't make any sense. Just like if you were to cast Mulan with a white actress, which was a major concern for people before it came out, to whitewash a Chinese character, and it really doesn't make any sense for the region and the respect of the culture. And unfortunately, people like her really don't understand this or public relations at all by the statements she have made recently that has truly destroyed any goodwill this film would have actually had, even if it actually did at all. And the problem with this, of course, starts with the fact of diversity, that she explained in an episode of Actors on Actors with Andrew Garfield that we need to love the people who are angry at this announcement and excited for a Latina princess. The problem with this is the fact that she gets to be a Latina princess when the story's region from where it was designed in both the original and in the actual story does not actually make sense to do so, really hammering the point of Snow White that they don't get at all done for the sake of check marks and not knowing what they're actually adapting in the first place. Why should we celebrate this constantly when it's already been pushed onto a story that was already successful the way it was? Why change the details to be more progressive in modern times when you actually have the opportunity to create something new? These actors and actresses are better off starring in something that is fresh and diverse in its story rather than completely missing the point of the animation as a storytelling medium. That you want to adapt this, that it's already been done and shown for real, that isn't a book that can be adapted in a new story. It's a film adapted into another film that was designed with the intention of doing things that were possible in a live action realm. And if you want to be represented like this, then make something new and don't try to remake something already shown that way. That logically makes sense. The second problem with Rachel is the footage released from D23 and so forth of her various statements about the original film, ones that gotten the most attention online from the past few weeks or so, growing the hatred for this very movie. And like I said, these were shown back a year ago at D23, but surfaced now due to various other reports that popped up that I will discuss later on in this video, ones that stem from the attitude Rachel has displayed for the very film.
The original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. I just mean that it's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince. And
the first major problem we see here is the fact of how she writes out the original 1937 film as a cartoon, which that is grossly inaccurate, because it is the first full-length traditionally animated feature film, not a cartoon, the one that actually paved the way for Disney animation and animation in general in the modern age, and without it, it really would have taken longer for it to actually be presented. And of course, also callously calling out the original film outdated in its approach when it's actually not, when its animation actually still holds up very well today with what exactly they were able to accomplish. It's a statement that you don't want to make when you're adapting a beloved film, especially the one that actually began everything for Disney in this age, compared to other princesses like Halle Bailey and so forth, that even despite the circumstances of her very casting, she also came across as very respectful and nice toward what she was adapting. Yes, she and everyone else involved with the film actually came from the stupid angle of making her more empowering when she already was, as I demonstrated in my review, but at the very least, she never actually made an attempt to have disrespectful statements about the original and tried to actually capture the good parts as best as what she was actually given. And what we witness with Rachel instead is the complete opposite, how more and more videos come out of her showing that she carries such an arrogant attitude to the story she is not actually understanding, and refuses to understand the points about making them in the first place. The one where she and Gal Gadot actually explained that this story still continues Disney trend of female empowerment that actually degrades the females in the process by making them girl bosses and leaders.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be, and the leader that her late father told her that she could be if she was fearless, fair, brave, and true. And so it's just a really incredible story for, I think, young people everywhere to see themselves in.
Statements like this are absolutely pathetic because it shows the real intent behind the remakes themselves, misunderstanding the main point of the original film, that somehow they need to be leaders, that the original is just so dated because she comes out for love, which isn't actually the main point of the film. Sure, it's there, but it wasn't really the main drive driving force for the plot when the prince honestly didn't actually have a character or much screen time given to him at all, mainly focusing on Snow White's journey and her adventures with the Seven Dwarfs, where she actually kind of demonstrates herself as a role model to the Seven Dwarfs themselves, leading them cleaner lives from where they actually were. That the film itself already showed her in a leadership role and leading on from where they were, where it feels stupid to actually call this film outdated when it clearly has women in positions of power. Her stepmother is the queen and the villain of the movie, to contrast to the kind, compassionate Snow White, who is the princess of this very kingdom, who was actually abused by her, but actually stood strong to work hard to one day get out of it. You know, similar to stories like Cinderella in a way, where the remake actually understood that very point. It understood that very original story and where she was coming from, and actually didn't take away from that point. That she showed how strong females can be in this certain way, and the stories actually took inspiration from what they did in Snow White that really does hold up well today in its animation and its main message that isn't about a prince saving her in the end. That was just a bonus because of what she displayed in her character to the dwarfs to keep her there so that the prince could actually find out later. I mean, it's not fleshed out, but actually understandable at times because of what actually went into the production being the first of its type. That it was clear she earned it, and villains like the queen actually didn't understand that for a quest to be the fairest of them all without earning it in her heart like actually Snow White did. And this is a fact that shouldn't come off as a surprise for many when Rachel hasn't actually watched the original in a very long time, very much evident by her interviews as seen here and statements she made at D23.
I was scared of the original cartoon. I think I watched it once and then I never picked it up again. So I watched it for the first time in probably 16, 17 years when I was doing this film.
This is just very telling about what has been developed behind the film. I mean, despite having your film directed by Mark Webb, who did the Amazing Spider-Man films, or the fact you have Greta Gerwig as a scriptwriter for the film despite her success with directing Barbie, it just feels like you aren't making this film on the basis of being a compelling story, but rather a product to make money that is being more woke to audiences, and it really actually comes off as that. These films I keep watching to show you aren't actually willing to understand the story in the first place that had more deeper meanings with it, where they're just trying to lift those meanings up to the surface without the magic that actually went behind it. It is the attitude that she is displaying that showcased the ignorance of the story overall, where the funny thing about all of this is how she and I are exactly the same age, 22. My birthday is actually today as of the posting of this video, and she is only about 3 months older than me, where I'm baffled I have a better understanding of this movie than she actually does, because I'm just truly a pathetic Disney fan who keeps watching them after all they've done recently, that I still care about these stories and want them to succeed because I love this company and what it was able to do, that I know the movie had much more to offer than what they were willing to do that she herself actually ignored willingly, where if you actually look at it, they actually decided during the original production that the focus was mainly going to be on the evil queen and Snow White's relationship more than any other minor point that has been brought forth by everyone. Stories don't require their heroes to be quote-unquote girl bosses, they just require them to have a compelling story and journey that they can go on. That things like this can be shown in this light and work because it's interesting, that you can have different types of heroes, but removing that way from the actual original story is just simply stupid, where it disallows our ability to tell unique characters in any setting, that you can have independent strong females and whatnot in very different ways, and Snow White actually showed that, and you really don't need to make it clear in a remake to get that. You just need to understand what the story is trying to tell, where they tried their best with what they produced. They even wanted to do more for the characters for the prince and everyone else involved in the original, where he was actually tortured by the queen herself, but they really couldn't do that with the amount of characters they had and the money they had overall in the short production. I mean, yes, she is right about being outdated in the sense of story development, but also she should actually take in the factor of a story that takes place over 500 years ago, where they already have her as a princess and having a queen for a stepmother that really isn't backwards as many people think. There are women in positions of power at the beginning, and it's just very clear from the original film.
There's a big focus on her love story. With a guy who literally stalks her.
Yeah.
Weird. Cast a guy in the movie. Right. Andrew Burnap, great dude. All of Andrew's scenes could get cut. Who knows? It's Hollywood, baby.
I'm not sure why you would even have your prince in the new one if he's even having a more reduced role than the original movie. Like, she's not going to be saved by the prince, but he was hardly there too, so what is your point? And another thing to understand about this is that the film isn't out till next year, that she has time to make other things clear at this point if she chooses to do so, and that's fine if you want to justify more of where you're coming from, to see more of what you have actually been doing, but then again, that has also been yet to be seen, and is also mired by other videos outside of interviews about her attitude towards Snow White and so forth.
I'm gonna stand there 18 hours in a dress of an iconic Disney princess. I deserve to be paid for every hour that it is streamed. posted online.
I mean, these aren't the statements that you should be making when starring in a feature film that so many people already stand in costume at Disneyland playing that very character. Sure, it's understandable about standing in a dress for 18 hours, but it makes her come off as an arrogant, snotty little brat compared to many other people who even work harder than she ever did and actually make less money in the same amount of time than what she had been doing as an actress and whatnot. But the main point about all of this is that it just comes off as pretentious, as people who actually want to watch the entertainment in the first place, to critique it on the film, and you're actually complaining about the role that you've been given, that we haven't seen her actually pay respect for the original film like many others have done and what she serves in that role. But beyond that point and beyond Rachel is the other issue with the Seven Dwarfs, notably seen in the removal from the title of the very film, unlike the original. This controversy is spanning from the comments of actors like Peter Dinklage, who believe that Snow White is a backward story, that everything about this is disparaging to those with dwarfism with its very story, which once again was actually pretty stupid as well, but Disney actually responded to it to take steps to avoid stereotypes and consult with members of the dwarfism community. And his response just never really clearly understood the original, that was never disparaging to them at all, that they were supporting characters of Snow White and actually were portrayed in a pretty positive light, living off well in the cottage and working in the mine like any person would actually probably do, that they aren't being backwards in any way living those normal lives, and it isn't clear that they're being dragged down by any other point. It's something that was very clear to the audience by how much they love these characters, that they literally are a part of the Disney building in Burbank, showcasing how much respect they have for them. But because of these issues that are being brought up, Disney has to rush to be sensitive to everyone again, and made worse by the leaked images of the production in July 2023, where footage of the production from Berkshire revealed that the depiction of the Seven Dwarfs had been reimagined for the film, consisting of only one actor with dwarfism along with 6 other non-dwarf actors of varying ethnicity, 6 males and 1 female portraying the associated set of 7 individuals, who were all portrayed as supernatural beings from German folklore and not actual human beings, that they were dwarfs, they were not human in any way. And it says, after denying these reports that these images depicted the actual film production, Disney actually later confirmed that they did indeed depict the production, with stand-in actors substituting for the lead. And although they were stand-ins themselves, they did showcase something similar to what Disney has already done with their remakes, like Peter Pan transforming the Lost Boys into the Lost Boys and Girls Club, not understanding the point of the Lost Boys actually being that way if you actually take a look at the original, destroying the story effectively in this sense. That because of Peter's comments, it radically transformed the way that things were being done, being portrayed for the worse and removing elements of what the story actually had in the first place. That images like this, despite the circumstances of not being the actual actors, which they actually have casted ones with dwarfism, actually shows Disney's push for political correctness, trying to not defend the loudest voice and replacing those effectively who want to be represented in a Disney film with what they have, like dwarfism. That it no longer understands the point of the dwarfs that had their own individual characters evident by their names and attitudes in the film. It just comes to a point where it has become more astonishing that Disney keeps ruining what they had more than we realize, because beyond everything else that I've talked about, this is clearly the most egregious remake out of them all, misunderstanding every single point about the film more than we realize of any other film, that the others actually still had heart and people at least cared to some degree, but this one constantly finds the need to bash its own story with its main actress, one even brought up by the original film's director's son, who is 91 years old, who stated that this film is truly a disgrace and that Walt and his dad would definitely be turning in their own grave to what they were doing, that they are hellbent on destroying what he exactly did. And if you're not convinced by any of this, then really take a look at the production of the original and its very story, because like Rachel, if you degrade this as a cartoon, then you really hardly understand what you're talking about for the worse, because Snow White came out of Walt's own opinion that he saw full-length feature films as a way to expand his storytelling possibilities from where he was in animation, that allowed for more elaborate plots and character development. It's a new way for animation to be presented in a medium when others actually never thought about, fine with the shorts they produced at the time, where Walt actually wanted to go bigger and better. The only films you really had in the mainstream were just live-action productions, not really animated ones particularly, where the inspiration of Snow White actually came out of a silent film he saw in 1916 when he was 15, which is ironic that he was inspired by a live-action film to make an animated one, and now they're actually just going to do the same exact thing 85 years later in live action. But the problem with the production was that Walt Disney had to fight to get the film produced. Both his brother and business partner Roy Disney and his wife Lillian actually attempted to talk him out of it, and the Hollywood movie industry derisively referred to his film as Disney's Folly when it was still in production, that they never actually believed in this film at all. He even had to mortgage his own house to actually help finance the film's production, which eventually ran up to a total cost of $1.5 million, a massive sum for a feature film in 1937 that is discluding inflation in that account. And midway through, Disney also needed a $250,000 loan to actually finish the film. All info that you can actually find online if you actually look into it, showcasing how this very film was really a big deal at the time, as no one except Walt himself actually really believed in it, that it literally could have broken Disney at this time and they wouldn't exist now, and Rachel actually wouldn't be starring in this film either, that animation and modern filmmaking and the theme park industry that he created wouldn't be where they are today if it weren't for for the sacrifices he was willing to make for this very film, and it really stands up to this very day. Snow White might not be a character described as having agency that modern heroes have, but she's also pretty alright for the time for where she was adapted from and a template of all Disney heroes we see here today. Instead of knocking this film down, Rachel should have just praised the original where they actually had both characters be female. The first major animated movie that was created at the time had a female hero and a female villain in a position of power, and that is something to actually be respected and talked about more. That what they talk about being the fairest of them all actually doesn't apply to beauty, but also to the inner character of Snow White in the original by how the mirror states that she is the fairest of them all, now beyond just being physically. How we ourselves know this by the attitude the queen showcases above all, and how Snow White just stays strong and hopeful from the very start, from the position that she's put in by her stepmother and the abuse she experienced after her parents passed when she was young, longing for love like any other woman could want in her life, where she eventually gets blessed by that one day when the prince actually finally shows up. How people wrongfully think that she is stalking her when he's not actually a major character at all, and only gets curious by how she longed for a prince to find her and what she actually gets, and being shocked by this and hides because of this surprise, probably thinking the same others actually thought by how he just appeared, but understanding he's not that bad, that she does have character and you just blindly don't see it, because the story is clearly focused on her perspective about life and how the evil queen tries to actually stop that, allowed to be free when the hunter actually couldn't do that in any way. I mean, some would want to have her more agency in this moment, but its display in animation was pretty great and a unique way to actually dive into her character with a dwarf. How we don't necessarily need her to be the girl boss because the story never actually needed to and was fine to how she was designed with the animals and how she cleaned up the dwarf's cottage. That she herself actually shows she cares about tidiness and other things about being a leader. And then when she meets the dwarves and offers her services as long as she has a place to stay, she actually helps them for the better to learn how to clean. That in her own way in the sequence of the film, and what Rachel had been saying, she actually becomes a leader in this film, teaching dwarves to clean and becoming more of a motherly figure to them. How they actually understand this and try their best to follow their advice, where they all celebrate and dance afterwards. It becomes a much better environment for a character to flourish, and the dwarves seem to actually appreciate it. They don't drag her down, and neither does actually Snow White drag them down either. Well, except the queen, who tries to stop any of this at no cost, not learning from her selfish arrogance and ironically disguising herself as the ugliest out of them all. How it really shows what she is like more than when she was the queen, and I really think the animation perfectly showed this without explaining this. How we actually know what she's like on the inside and now see it on the outside, and even though she succeeds at putting her asleep, her hubris also costed her by how many actually people cared for Snow White, from the animals and the dwarfs pushing her all the way up on the cliff and causing her own downfall, both physically and metaphorically in those sense, making her die the way she lived, ugly, arrogant, and spiteful. And we actually see afterwards that the dwarfs try to help her the best they can despite what had happened, not knowing if she can be saved when it comes to the terms of true love's kiss with how the story was designed. Instead of burying her, they actually did keep hope for her to live, where it was enough when the prince actually comes back around, hearing after a year later and trying to help her free, making her live happily ever after as the new queen with her king of the kingdom. Now it was clear he wasn't a stalker because he just appeared for 2 seconds originally in the beginning of the film and not again until a year after the events of this very film. Seeing that in the end without knowing its history really makes you respect what they did overall with the film, truly standing the test of time of being a landmark for the entire industry. That we need to show more respect to what has been done rather than lambasted by its outdated decisions like a pretentious actress who is ignorant to these facts. It might not be as developed as what we see today, but compared to others at the time, it's actually pretty great and very inspiring as a film overall. It's the point where Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs will stand the test of time for being an animated film that actually changed the industry, where the soulless remake will eventually be forgotten after it fails next year. That they just continue not to understand the point of the original and banking off that name to try to make a short profit. That maybe next time, instead of doing these things and having horrible talking points for those who actually promote your own film, then maybe you should just start making stories for the sake of a story that's compelling and interesting for its audience. That they have a clear template for them as showcased with what Cinderella does that actually does add more without removing that very film. And how they actually can be more diverse if they choose real grounded stories that actually make sense, like Atlantis, that focus on the crew as the heart of the story. That they have so many ideas for this, but they constantly choose the wrong ones and misunderstand the points of the films. How we just do want to see such stories and people out there, but not for something that's already been done in a certain way and now being done in a different way that misunderstands that and is clearly done to prop up a certain message just because. How we just want you to realize that these movies are loved because of the stories they have and not what aspects they can tell. That you can promote it again for the sake of it, but you never will learn that lesson and will continue to do so until you perish eventually. And with that said, I'm still going to watch this crap. I'm all done, so goodbye.